This is a video overview for CRIM1001 Foundations. This is the offender case study analysis assessment. So I just wanted to go through this quickly with you and speak to the instructions to bring them to life, give them a bit of context, and hopefully answer some of the questions that you might have about this task. So firstly, the task is worth 35% of your overall marks. It is a 1700 word assessment and it is due in week 8. So basically, the task or what you need to show me through the assessment is your understanding of the theories of crime that we have studied in the unit or others that you may have found in the literature that are viable in application to a hypothetical offender profile. So I'll go through the 3 profiles in just a moment. But basically, you apply your understanding of the theories to your chosen profile to show me that you understand how the theory works in practice, and you would incorporate the key concepts from the theory, the key assumptions that it makes about crime, the way that it explains offending to that hypothetical offender and their circumstances. So the first task obviously then is to select one of the offender profiles. They can be found in this document, so I'll go through those in a moment. The second step is to analyse that particular offender, the crimes they have committed, and the factors that contribute to their offending. And in doing that, you need to identify the theories that would be relevant to explain their offending behaviour, the context of that offending behaviour, and then talking through some of the key concepts, the key terms, if there are key processes that the theory puts forward in terms of understanding crime, you would explain how we can see those things at work in the profile. So I'm going to skip to the profiles now. Let's just scroll down to the second page. So there are 3 profiles. These are entirely fictional. They are for educative purposes only. If they resemble an individual, just be aware that that is an entire coincidence, completely coincidental. The other point I would like to make is that some cases are more sensitive than others. In particular, profile 2 does discuss sexual assault and victimization. So I would urge you to use your discretion when selecting the case that you want to analyze. If at any point when you are working through this content, if you feel that you become distressed or upset, which is an absolutely normal response, then reach out for support. So you could reach out to Lifeline, you could reach out to 13 Yarn, which is a First Nations support, you could reach out to the free CQU counselling service, or you could reach out to me. I'm happy to chat at any time. But just make sure that if you are struggling with any of the content, if that triggers anything for you, then please do reach out for help. All right, let's jump into them. So the first profile we have is Adam. So Adam is a younger man. He is a 16-year-old male with autism spectrum disorder. He lives in the neighborhood of Todd. So each of your profiles will give you the sort of social community context in which the person is living. It will give you their age, it will give you their gender. Okay, so here it tells us a little bit about where Adam is living. It's in an area that is characterized by poor social and healthcare services, high levels of property crime. It's a very rundown community, not a lot of investment in infrastructure. So what we're starting to see is there are some important details about the community here, and that may well link to a particular theory of crime. So we have high levels of unemployment, poverty, frequent influx of migrant communities to the area, no support from the government. So having a think about, for this particular case study, are there any theories of crime that we have looked at that talk about that neighbourhood community element and its connection to offending? Here we have the context of Adam's early life. So one of the things you are required to do for each of the case studies is to connect the early life experiences of the individuals to their later offending behaviour or subsequent offending behaviour. So here we have Adam, his behaviour was too challenging for his mother to deal with, so she decided to leave and pursue a new life with a new family and partner. At that time, he began to develop behavioural and social issues, so he didn't attend kindergarten, he didn't socialise with other children, his disability was undiagnosed for his entire childhood. At the time, we learn that he lived with his father and two older brothers, and they were also involved in the criminal justice system. He has difficulties learning in the conventional school system. He's absent from school, hanging out at home with his brothers. So we see again here an important element of his childhood in terms of his disability, in terms of his learning challenges, socialization with other children, but also the social setting, familial setting with his father and two older brothers there. Then we start to get into more of the offending related behaviour and the onset of that, and that's in the company of his two brothers, where he committed numerous offences as a teenager. So those offences are important when we're looking at each of the case studies. So we need to look at the type of crime that is being committed to think about the theories that would offer the best explanation for what's happening. So we have theft from the local shopping centre, attempted burglary of residential properties. The motivation for these is also important. So for each of your offender profiles, try to look at the motivation for the type of offending behaviour, because that is going to give you a good clue or insight into which theory you could match to explain it. So it's not just about the crimes that somebody has committed, it's also about what motivates people or drives people to engage in those offences in terms of how we would then explain those and theorise about those. So he has committed these offences to prove something to his brothers. He has also met some boys in remand who are involved in crime. They are learning from each other about crime, swapping stories, and joining efforts to engage in offending. When he was asked about his offending by his case manager, he said that he does it because it's quite normal in the area. So that might give you another clue about what's going on. He explains that no one wants to live in that community, but his parents don't care about him. There's not a lot of investment in him. And he also has had a hard time making friends. So he's really trying to stay in with his friendship group. They're all that he has got, and if he lost them, he would have nobody. So from reading this, it should be clear which theories of crime would apply. We will brainstorm in the workshop. If you read a case study, though, and you just feel a little bit lost in terms of what theories would apply and they don't really stand out to you, then I would suggest moving on to look at another case study. And I would choose the case study in which it becomes very clear as you're reading through which theories would apply, because that probably implies or infers that you have a better understanding of those theories, or you get them more so than others. So if that one didn't really stand out to you, the next profile is quite different. This is Rima. Rima is a 42-year-old mother of two from Carlo. That's a neighbourhood on the outskirts of the city. There's quite a lot of social disadvantage and crime in the area. So in her early years as a teenager, she was a victim of multiple incidences of abuse, unfortunately at the hands of men who were known to her. Her parents would tell her that she was useless, that she would amount to nothing. Her mother was engaged in sex work to support their family, and her father worked a low-income blue-collar job. So we're starting to see that from a very early age there may have been trauma experiences for Rima. There is certainly an early experience of victimization and sexual abuse, and obviously they're not a very healthy familial environment for her to grow up in. When she went to school, the teachers suspected that abuse, but there was no intervention there. She copped a pretty tough time from fellow students who would call her derogatory names. They would also physically and emotionally bully her, so we see that victimization continuing. As a result, she left school early and started to engage in drug and alcohol use to deal with the trauma of her victimization. So we see there the trauma again is having an impact on her behaviours, and she was kicked out of the home at 15. She then went to sleep rough on the streets, where she encountered an older man who offered her money to engage in sexual acts. So we see this element of gendered sexual exploitation, which is following through from her early childhood victimization experiences. And the motivation there to engage in that was that she needed money to support her drug use. So she was incarcerated at that time on numerous short sentences for drug possession, drug use, and prostitution. So we see here repeated incidences of short-term incarceration, which can be very disruptive. She was receiving very little to no support when she was released. So here we start to see that we can perhaps attribute some of the impact on her offending to the system itself. So, thinking about what theories might help you to understand the broader context in which her offending has occurred and her contact with institutions and the justice system. So her offending is cyclical in nature, but she did manage to eventually get off drugs, found employment in hospitality, was living a pretty stable life for the 10 years that she was with her partner. She didn't offend. She then became pregnant with her twin girls, and when they were 2, her partner left her. She continued to raise them independently, but obviously that was quite difficult. When the girls entered school, it became even harder because she lost her long-term job. So again, she finds herself thrust into this period of unemployment. She's on welfare support by the government. She was not getting enough or receiving enough welfare to cover the cost of her rental. So her and her young children are all on the street living transiently. Very similar situation to that which she was in when she was younger. They were placed in accommodation settings with men who had violent histories. So this is where we start to see that gendered violence and the associated trauma picks up again for her. She was approached for sex work, and one of her daughters was ill, so she then engaged in that sex work to pay for medical treatment. So here with this case study, there is a very much a gendered aspect in terms of the sexual violence that she is experiencing, but also her vulnerability in these settings that are unsafe. Eventually, at the end here of the case study, Rima finds a job as a retail assistant at a local store. And so she's still feeling these pressures to care for her young daughters. In this position, she was responsible for counting the money, closing the store without supervision, and she saw that as an opportunity to take some money and products that she could resell to pay for her rental property. And she was arrested and served again a short prison sentence for these offences. So this case study is quite different to the first one, obviously, in terms of gender, in terms of age, in terms of the offence type. So you would be looking at slightly different theories for this case study than you would for the first. And lastly, we have profile 3, which is Richard. Again, Richard is very different from the previous 2 offenders. He is a 45-year-old executive in the financial sector. He comes from a very well-to-do background. He holds an MBA from a very prestigious university. He has worked for several multinational corporations. He's very polished. He exudes a very confident demeanour. In terms of his youth, he grew up in a middle-class suburban neighbourhood. His parents were both accountants, so they are both involved in that financial business and industry, and they instilled in him a strong work ethic and emphasised the importance of success. So they are probably expecting quite a lot from Richard, and no doubt he would have felt that pressure. He was very intelligent as a child, but he did like to bend the rules to his advantage. So we see quite early that he's engaging in these behaviours that would then subsequently lead to further offending and justice involvement. He really wants to become a successful entrepreneur as a young person. And so at the age of 14, he orchestrated a minor deception when he manipulated the school's fundraising system and diverted a portion of the proceeds to himself. And he found that quite thrilling. So this ability to outsmart his teachers really fueled his desire to keep engaging in these risky behaviours. And so during high school, he then dabbled in stock trading, and he used the allowance to invest in penny stocks, relying on insider tips from family and friends, which is obviously a big no-no. But his parents thought he was very clever. They applauded his success. So he's really getting that reinforcement from his parents. As an adult, we see this carry through to Richard's white-collar crimes, which primarily revolved around insider trading. He exploited his position as a senior manager. So again, there's that exploitation of the privilege, the access, and the power, just like he did when he was younger, to gain access to confidential information about upcoming mergers, acquisitions, and stock market movements. So using that knowledge, which he is privileged knowledge that he has access to, he executed some very well-timed stock trades, and there was a substantial profit from that, while remaining inconspicuous. So largely undetected, he's flying under the radar. At that time, Richard's family faced financial difficulties. So remember that they were middle class, they were doing quite well, but here they find themselves in some financial struggle. And the parents' accounting business closed down, so Richard wants to help them out. He subsequently increased the intensity and severity of his offending in order to help his parents. Now, we have a little bit of information here about the individual level aspects of Richard's personality. He is narcissistic. He needs this constant admiration, sense of entitlement. So that may be important to him and important to his offending behaviour. He believes he's above the law, immune to consequences. So there are both individual level, meso community level, and macro institutional level elements to all three of the case studies. And I would really encourage you to tap into those three different levels when you think about critically analysing and selecting your theories. Okay. So in terms of Richard, we get some more detail about his social setting, his extravagant lifestyle, and the fact that he wants to really hold on to that. And there's a pressure that he feels to maintain that affluent lifestyle. And that really drives him deeper into the world of white-collar crime. So another really interesting offender profile there. They are all interesting. They all have numerous elements that you can pick up on. There is not one profile that will lend itself better than another to this assignment. They are just different. So choose a profile that you feel speaks to you in terms of your understanding of the theories. And then you need to write your 1,700-word essay. And in that, you cover these elements here. Now, it doesn't mean you need to cover it in this sequence. You can have an introduction. You could explain theory 1 first, theory 2 second, and then maybe a sub-theory third. Remembering also that you need to reflect on how criminological theories can assist us in understanding offending behaviour and determining appropriate responses to crime. So in terms of how do we prevent it? How do we punish people? You do need to talk about that, and you could weave that throughout your analysis, or that might be something that you touch on in the introduction. So, CRIM theories are important in this regard. These analysis of these two case studies is going to bring that to life and show that. And then you might bring it back to that discussion before you conclude and wrap up your essay. But basically, as I've done when I talked through them, you need to analyse the offender's life history, relevant factors from their childhood, their family, their upbringing, and thinking about the impact and talking about the impact that might have had on their offending in connection to theories. And then looking at any social, biological, or psychological factors that appear relevant to your case study, applying those relevant theories and the concepts from those theories to your analysis. And then any other factors that stand out to you, and go and find some literature of your own on those. So using the CQU library database to do some research. Okay, so writing it in a traditional essay format, so an introduction, body paragraphs, as many body paragraphs as you need to cover the important aspects that you're talking about. So don't limit yourself to, say, just 2 or 3 body paragraphs. 11 or 12 font, Times New Roman or Arial 1.5 double spacing. So it's a very traditional presentation here. 5 different scholarly sources, which should not be hard when we look at these different elements here. So theory 1, the childhood elements, you might have 2 sources. When you get into the social elements, you might have another 2. If there's any psych elements, there's another 2 there. We're already at 6 sources. Here you need to talk about the CRIM theories and their relevance. So looking at those introductory to theory textbooks, for example. You could even bring in sources from the unit if you've already reached your 5 sources. So it should be very easy to hit 5 different scholarly sources throughout this paper. We cite those in text using the author's surname and the year, and we also provide a full reference list at the end with all of the details for each source in alphabetical order. Now, let's have a look at how you will be assessed. Here are the criteria. There are 8 marks for your illustration of relevant concepts through an analysis of the case. The way that you have applied the key concepts and terms to explain the offending behaviour, that is very important, because remember, our theories help us to explain crime. That is worth 10 marks. The application of research and literature from the course material, set readings, but also self-sourced scholarly literature, a minimum of 5 academic sources, is worth 10 marks. So I really want to see that you are able to go out and find scholarly references and that you're able to cite those throughout your work. And then the quality of the piece is worth 7 marks. So that's your writing, your expression, the quality of the structure, the presentation, the layout, and have you referenced correctly. So if you have any questions at all on any of these criteria, please reach out. We will talk about them in the workshop. I will be going over this again in the workshop.